Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who lick the rim of a salt glass and say, tastes like ghosts. Right now we are reading Gene Ray's The Mainz Psalter, which is one of the stories in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird anthology. I'm Zach, and this week I am very interested in having fun in a weird fiction story. I think this is the most fun I've had reading one of these stories in this entire anthology. I loved it.
That sounded like the beginning of a dating profile. I'm Zach, and I'm interested in having fun. I'm Bob. I'm interested in... I'm really interested in Jean Ray. Like, he is wacky. He wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, maybe even more than a lot of these authors in this weird fiction anthology, which is full of extremely prolific authors. But he wrote, hundreds of tales in 7 years.
1,500 short stories and novels. Yeah.
Wow.
You know, we could start a new show, just Wheel of John Ray. We just do a different one every week. We'd be going for years.
We'll be trapped on that pirate ship in the nth dimension. Yes. Yeah. What happened to Zach and Bob?
So, what do we, aside from being extraordinarily prolific, what do we know about John Ray?
So, this story, the Mainz Psalter, he actually wrote it in prison. I don't know if you knew that. He got arrested for embezzlement, and he was charged to 6 years, but he only stayed there for 2. And he wrote this story and The Shadowy Street, which is also quite famous. But even jail could not stop him. He just kept writing.
He seems like a really interesting guy. I got this bit of info here. I'm just going to read it. In 1929, John Ray had been hired by the Belgian publisher Hip Janissens to translate from the Dutch a series of crime thrillers originally presented as apocryphal adventures of Sherlock Holmes, until the copyright owners for the works of Conan Doyle objected to the use of the name of the famous detective. So then they changed the name of the series to a different detective name. They chose Harry Dixon, which is insane to me, the American Sherlock Holmes. But... but the text that he was supposed to translate into English were so bad that he basically just said, look, I'm just going to write new stories for you guys. And the publisher agreed to it. So I think that is how I don't want to say the start of him becoming prolific, but he did write 106 out of the 178 adventures of Harry Dixon.
Sorry, it's impossible not to laugh. That is incredible. So many stories, and this is not a short story. This is quite a long story. I think the audio is about an hour and a half, and I think page-wise, about 36 pages. Very good story. I would really, if anyone could find this, because I looked and looked and looked and could not find this no matter where I went, but I would really like to read this article called Jean Ray and the Belgian School of the Weird by Hubert van Cuylenburg. Cannot find it. But apparently he is called the Belgian or Flemish Edgar Allan Poe, and he is the kind of the starter of the weird in that area, in Belgium. But you can tell that it is similar in a way to H.P. Lovecraft. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It's similar in a way to some of the other stories in Weird, but it also feels very Victorian. It feels very old, but has very weird concepts.
Honestly, I couldn't disagree more. I thought it felt extremely modern and funny. I thought this was one of the funniest stories we had read. But before we talk about the text itself, I do want to point out one thing when I was researching more about this author and specifically about this story. Every article that I could find included people stressing, or even John Ray himself stressing, that he had never, ever, not once read William Hope Hodgson's ghost pirate stories before writing this. And the fact that I couldn't find any information about this story without people adamantly denying that he had plagiarized it tells me pretty much that he probably
he protests too much.
Yeah. So what that makes me want to do is check out this Hodgson fellow, and if if anyone's watching right now and has any recommendations, please send them our way.
ripping off Hodgson. When I say old, I think he writes a little bit like Charles Dickens. It feels Victorian. There are weird relationships that don't really seem to need to be in this story, but they're great. You know, the relationship between Jelwyn and Friar Tuck. Why is Jelwyn like this estranged prince hanging out with his friend who has visions? But they are super interesting. This weird, I guess to set it up, there's a guy who's going to be a captain. He's approached and by this other guy who is a school teacher who has come upon a bunch of money from selling this old copy of the Mainz Psalter. So he renames the boat and he assembles his crew to go out in search of something, but he doesn't really say what that thing is going to be. Now, when they get this ragtag group of people, it's a lot like the old Treasure. So it's a lot like Treasure Island, where you have kind of interesting people. It seems like you don't know who you can trust, but eventually they get into this weird other universe as they sail forward. Just strange things start happening to them. At one point, they're being shot at. They've been having this great time, this very idyllic scene where they've parked their boat up next to a beach. They can go and eat coconuts. They can go and cook fish. They can shoot rabbits and hang out with each other and lie in hammocks. But then at the top of a cliff, they just see people being pushed off of it. So 3 people get pushed down, and it's like someone is lifting these people and throwing them off. And finally, they just get a glimpse of whoever is up there. And it's you can't see it clearly, but it seems like something very out there. Something that is from another dimension, something monstrous, and then it just kind of disappears. After that, they start to enter. It's unclear if they're really entering into another universe, but weird things start happening. Different crew members start disappearing. And then eventually it goes full on. We have entered into another universe, to the point that their ship is flying through the air. This huge leviathanic monster comes up and stares at them. Also feels quite VanderMeer-ish, with this giant being staring at you as it passes by you. But then we're totally immersed in weird.
So this is where I kind of had to stop and figure out why I was reacting negatively to this procession of weirdness in the story. And it's an interesting feeling to where you can read a story and feel so entertained by the voice of it. You know, I loved the writing of John Ray and the characters that he was giving us. But for some reason, I was not connecting with this long procession of weird images that we were being given. And it got me thinking that sometimes, I guess Jeff VanderMeer's, Area X tetralogy, for example, in the first book of Jeff VanderMeer's Annihilation, they go into Area X, and it is truly delightful to see this procession of weird images and feel like, oh, you're immersed in this world where anything can happen. But in this story, I found that I just couldn't care for some reason. To me, it didn't feel like there was any stakes. It felt ephemeral, I guess I should say. Ethereal. Like, oh, these are things, but I don't really know what to make of them. What do you make of my half-formed, doughy, hazy, emotional reaction to this? Did you feel similarly at all? Do you empathize with my plight?
Do I empathize with you? I totally get what you're saying. And normally, I think the scenes that are described, if they're described in a different way, I might not be as interested in them. But I think, again, that style, that Victorian style, did it for me, because it feels like a salty old sea dog telling me what happened. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. There's a kind of earnestness in that Victorian style that makes me feel like, okay, this is real, and I'm trusting this person to tell me this real thing. I think if it was more modern, it would not be cool. But this old bit is. Something that I liked about it, though, and I think is quite original, is that, yes, we're seeing these crazy things. Yes, we're immersed in this crazy world. But we also have these characters reflecting on what the nth dimension is, what they call it in this, what that is. And while Jelwyn and Friar Tuck has these visions, and Jelwyn seems to be studying these things, and he seems to be the prince of... They eventually have to redact his full name. They say, we're not going to disclose his name. But he says, okay, The space we're aware of is in our the space we are aware of in our dreams, which presents the past, the present, and perhaps the future on a single plane. And then there's the world of atoms and electrons and relative and immense spaces with mysterious kinds of life. He outlines these three different kinds. He says there are dreams. There's where we live. There is dreams. Then there is the plane of atoms and electrons. And then he calls this other thing, the nth dimension, this devilish region. I think it's interesting for them to think about how the different layers overlap or intersect. And when it comes up and we see this thing, it also connects it to history because they're saying they do compare it to the Leviathan. And they say, okay, what is happening? Is it another dimension, or are we returning to, the time of the Bible suddenly? What's happening to us? And I think Jean Ray twists it many different times, because after we've had this gigantic whale-like thing that is so big it's the size of a city that raises above them, we later have the schoolmaster showing back up in the water. He should have been dead. He's been disappeared. How on earth could someone swim in the water for like 3 days? But he is first promising things to the captain, then threatening the captain, then promising things to the captain, then threatening the captain again like the devil. However, when they shoot at him, he just becomes a mannequin. I think
that was a different moment.
Damn it. Well, yep. It twists it anyway, Zach.
Yeah.
But two different moments, because there's two things floating in the water, and the mannequin. Okay, what happens with the mannequin? Because I know the schoolmaster comes up, he denies him, but the mannequin shows up too.
He disappears he falls out of the nth dimension and lands in the water and is picked up by a different boat. So we're back in the real world, and then a portal opens on the deck.
Oh, naturally.
And a clergyman walks out.
Oh, it's the clergyman that's the man. Yes.
It's a clergyman. Yeah. And the clergyman, I really laughed at this, the idea of someone coming through a portal and then immediately just start throwing hands at people,
I think Jet Li's the one.
Our protagonist, and then our protagonist comes up and shoots the person. And after he does that, they're like, wait a minute. The guy falls in the water after being shot, and they fish him out, and it's a mannequin that's been shot in the face. To me, the mannequin image and the schoolmaster image swimming, and at one point, like running on the water, on top of the water, and clawing after them. Those were two of the most fantastic images I think I've read in this anthology yet. I loved those images, contrary to what I had just ranted to you about a mere 2.5 minutes ago.
So we like these that at least throw things kind of topsy-turvy. Maybe we've seen too much of the giant thing coming from another dimension. But yeah, those two other ones I think were quite good.
Well, what you said about we've already seen, there were elements that we have already seen many times. The tentacles, the kind of monstrous, misshapen things. Even the idea of a kind of self-moving ocean, I think we've seen in like Stanislav Lem's Solaris, for example. And it brings me back to when we read Luigi Ugolini's The Vegetable Man in this anthology. That was translated in English for the first time, and the translator, whose name is Brendan Connell, said some really interesting things about what makes weird fiction effective. He says that you can't have weird fiction if you're using images that people have seen before. So, for example, weird fiction that features vampires will never work, because you and I, we know what a vampire is. Scary, sure, but because we kind of know the bounds of what stops them and what they want, it's not weird. We know, better go buy some garlic or a steak, or something like that. Not meat. Anyway,
garlic and steak.
Well, I'm hungry, I guess. Anyways, but if you present someone with a image that is truly unique, it has a chance to unsettle them in ways that allow the horror story to raise its pitch to weird, to true, pure weird. And that mannequin image and that school teacher clawing through the water at a boat that was powering away from him, those were weird images. I couldn't get enough.
full on weird. The nature of this being a story that is related to us too, I wonder if that helps these images stick or helps them feel more disturbing. Because when we read Merrill's The Pit People or The People in the Pit, we thought, okay, once you get down to the pit itself, it's very interesting, it's very cool, it's quite vivid, but it's not exactly scary anymore. The scary thing is the character who can no longer separate that experience of the image or having witnessed the image from their psyche or from who they are. It has affected them so much, it has almost ruined them as a person. Now, this is a story that's being told to us by this crew. Many of the crew members died. They all suffered through this, and now it's a story. Do you think there is something to telling something and it being like, look, I'm going to tell you something crazy. I'm going to tell you this crazy ghost story. Does that make the images even more fresh or even more potent?
I think you are 100% right that the element of seeing the reaction of the person who is telling the story, seeing their physical, I guess, harm or the physical effects of the story itself upon the body or psyche of the storyteller changes everything. And People of the Pit is probably the best example of this, just because the storyteller who had to just climb 10,000 steps out of a giant pit is now missing his hands. He'll periodically stop telling the story, eyes roll in his head. He goes into a trance and he starts climbing. I'll never forget that in my life. But, another good example was the classic weird fiction tale, The Night Wire by H.F. Arnold, which is one of the most famous stories in the weird fiction anthology, which I thought also did this in an interesting way, where someone is in a trance-like state, almost transcribing different telegraphs, 2 different telegraphs, one in each hand. He's an idiot savant. But then it turns out like he dies at some point and his body keeps transcribing it. It's not quite the same thing, but it plays into this idea of the medium itself is just as interesting as the message that's being conveyed. So this is all to say that this story does that, but I think that was not as much the focus here as much as in the other stories. He is affected, but it's not foregrounded in the telling of the tale as much as in the other stories.
That's very true. It's just kind of a setup, like an old salty sea dog setup. I would really like to read more of Jean Ray, or Ramundus Johannes de Kremer is his real name, but I think we should read more of him. And his most famous book is Malpertuis. I think 1943. I started watching the movie, or I watched the trailer anyway for the movie. It's 1971. The director is Harry Kumel, and it's starring Orson Welles. Oh my God, it is the most Zach and Bob movie I have ever looked at. It's Orson Welles sitting in this giant king's bed with his giant Orson Welles eyes, and he just doesn't move around at all. But it's very like Dario Argento, Suspiria, where cameras zoom in on people. Cameras will go down like a spiral staircase following people. There's tons of blood. It's all about the image and the color. This book, I guess, is like a puzzle. People compare it to a labyrinth or a puzzle of Gothic fiction. However, Greek gods are involved. There's lots of wild parties. So we got to read the book and we got to watch the movie.
Cool. Well, let's consider this the first turn of many in our Wheel of John Ray. All right, I'll talk to you later, Bob.
I'll talk to you later for the next 1,499 episodes, Zach.